So let's take a simple example. In July 2004, not so long ago, the highest judicial body in the world, the International Court of Justice, a question was put to it by the UN General Assembly. And the question that the UN General Assembly put to the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, the question was this: Israel is building a wall in the West Bank, and can you tell us what are the legal repercussions? What's the legal significance of the wall that Israel is building? And there are 15 judges on the ICJ, and they have to look at two aspects. First, they have to ask themselves the question, is this a legitimate question for the International Court to be deliberating on? Because some countries said, no, this is not within your jurisdiction. You shouldn't be deliberating on this question. The court first entertained that question and decided, no, this is a legitimate question, and we're going to investigate it. And then the second question was to answer the question that was posed by the General Assembly. Most people, I suspect, in this room, or some of you, will know the answer that the court reached, was called its advisory opinion. The court said that the wall was illegal, the wall had to be dismantled, and that Israel had to pay compensation for the damages it caused while it was building the wall, which it still is building as we speak now. But in fact, that was the least important part of the opinion of the International Court of Justice. At least from my point of view, it's the least important part. Because what happened when the court deliberated on the wall was something quite unusual, I think. Most of you in this room have heard of this thing called the peace process. How many of you have heard of the peace process? Raise your hand. How many of you have not heard of the peace process? Raise your hand and dare to humiliate yourself. Yeah. I love the courage of ignorance. And then there's this subdivision of the peace process. The peace process is the longest running soap opera in world history. And then there's a subdivision, it's called the final status issues. How many of you have heard of that expression, the final status issues? Raise your hand up high so we know. Not too many, but I think you will know it when we describe it. The final status issues refers to those issues in the Israel-Palestine conflict which are said to be so complicated, so controversial, that they have to be put off to the final stage of negotiations, because it's said if you begin negotiations with those questions, the negotiations are right away going to fall apart. So we have to put them off until the end of negotiations, and that's where the term final status negotiations comes from. And the issues which are alleged to be the most complicated, the final status issues, are usually said to be 4. Now, I noticed your hand go up. I'm not going to try to embarrass you or humiliate you, even though I understood from the person who introduced us that at this very moment, billions of people are focused on you. So, can you name 2 of the 4 final status issues? Yeah.
The borders, the settlements, the Jerusalem, and the final status of the state or civil administration, and there's one refugees.
Yeah, very good.
There are 5.
No, 4, but the third one was off, but it was correct. It was very well done. By American standards, you would be teaching at Harvard. The 4 final status issues are said to be borders, settlements, refugees, or Jerusalem and refugees. Now, as it happened, when the International Court of Justice had to rule on the legality of the wall, it also had to decide 3 of the 4 final status issues. Because if Israel were building a wall on its border or inside its border, it would obviously be legal. Any country has the sovereign right to build a wall on its border or within its sovereign territory. And so the court had to figure out what are Israel's borders. Because if the border is where the wall is being built, it's legal. But if the wall is being built outside the border or being built on another people's sovereign territory, obviously serious legal issues arise. So, for example, some of you, I don't know how land is allotted in Finland, but I assume some of you own private homes. Who owns a private home where their parents own private homes? Raise your hand. Very few. So, if your parent decides to build a fence along the border of your property, no serious issues arise. But if mom and dad decide they're going to build a fence that goes around their neighbor's swimming pool, well, obviously a serious legal issue arises. And so the court had to decide what are Israel's legal borders. Secondly, the wall that Israel is building is taking a strange route. The court called it a sinuous route. Now, I want to see how good your English is, because if you know sinuous, then you belong in Oxford, not just Harvard. Who knows sinuous? Yes? What is it? Yeah, very good. It's very impressive. Most Americans are struggling with English. You use sinuous all the way in Finland. It means a kind of circuitous, winding route, zigzag route. And this particular wall, it takes a route that incorporates about 80% of the settlers and 60% of the settlements. And so the court had to decide what's the legal status of the settlements. Because Israel said, we're building the wall in order to protect the settlements. And a question arises because there's this technical principle of law, which all of you can easily understand. It's not so complicated. The technical principle is you cannot derive a right from a wrong. I know that sounds a little strange. What can that mean? It simply means if the settlements themselves are illegal, that is to say, they are a wrong, then you can't have the right to build a wall to defend what's wrong in the first place.